This Pitch Breakfast video is brought to you by Spangler and Agans.
Thank you.
Tell me what you are going to be pitching on today.
I am pitching a app called, neat, better? Awesome. Today I'm pitching a application called Go Yoga. It is a pitch intended for, it's a non-technical pitch intended for investors and consumers. So, awesome, cool. All right, so that's up. Bear with me, this is my first time pitching ever. I think this is the first time I've been on stage since 8th grade. And I have never made a keynote before 2 days ago. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about me. Since September, have been looking at code, and I got this idea while working at a restaurant. I left feeling frustrated, and I just wanted to go to a yoga class. And I've been doing yoga for about 5 years, so my qualifications right there. I've spoken about this concept to a room before, and I know one thing, and it's just that across the board. Actually, let me ask, who in this room has gone to a yoga class before? Nice. Yeah, give yourself a round of applause, because you at one time or another have invested energy into getting more energy. Yeah, I learned that investors, when they hear yoga, they don't hear much money coming from that. So I wanted to throw this up first thing for potential investors to see, that it is a growing billion-dollar industry worldwide. And yeah, there's money to be made here. And one of the first problems that I ever encountered as a yogi was figuring out where to practice yoga. At first, it's a very daunting idea to go into a room with a Walmart mat and no idea what you're doing. And it's pretty challenging when you hear that there are like 31 types of yoga and you can pick and choose, and there are like 20 yoga studios in Charlotte. So just throw yourself at the wall and see what sticks is a method, but when you have a 30% joining rate each year and a 20% falling rate each year, it shows that there is not enough people finding their right type of class. So, Go Yoga is a geolocation app for yogis, and this is for people who are experienced in yoga. This is for people who are trying yoga out. And ideally, its intention is to help you find the studio that makes you feel like this, and help you avoid the studio that makes you feel like this. Plain and simple. But on top of that, there are many other iterations and specifics that an application can do to help people go from, this is an app that is useful to me, to, I cannot believe the way I was living before this app. And there are certain ideas that I wanted to employ within Go Yoga, like, there we go. All right. So the reason that yogis will prefer using Go Yoga as opposed to Mind Body Connect, as I'm sure, judging from the hands that went up, have probably heard of. Mind Body Connect is cool. It's really cool. I didn't know about it until I started this idea, and at first I thought that my problem was solved, which would be neat because then I wouldn't have to do this. But when I started using it, I realized that it's catered more for everything exercise. You've got CrossFit, Taibo, Taekwondo, all wrapped in there, and it's kind of a one-size-fits-all solution for a pretty particular market, and that doesn't quite land. So what I want Go Yoga to do is figure out what you're looking for in a yoga class. If you have issues that you're addressing physically, they help you find rehabilitation classes. If you just want more energy, then they find classes that are doing that for you. And this is all for, the geolocation purposes are all for locating the cheapest rate around you, if that is your priority, or the best teachers, because those become a priority. I know after my 5 years, that's what I've experienced. You start following teachers to different yoga studios because they're kind of like free agents. So while you can favorite studios in Mind-Body Connection, you cannot follow your teachers, and that becomes problematic. Or, nice, thank you. Yeah, so we avoid that problem through implementing these favorites of studios, classes, and teachers. And if I could have you click one more. And because I started this idea thinking of, I just didn't want a money-making idea. Like, this is not really supposed to be the next Uber or the next insert your favorite big money-making app here. This is just kind of an idea that I thought would be helpful, and it would end a problem that I know I'm not alone in. But if there is an interest in making money for investors, because yoga teachers are free agents and they can teach yoga at several different studios and still barely scrape by to make a living, I wanted to implement a second phase of Go Yoga's mission, which is to kind of take a page out of Uber's book, where they took every other car on the road and made that into a potential employee. I would like to do this with public spaces all over the world. Public parks, piers, any nice setting, weather permitting, can be a yoga destination, and a teacher sets that up and then starts kind of taking financial control over their own life and building it on their own terms. This is perfect for a free agent market who is really kind of doing it both out of a hobby and pursuance of something that they personally enjoy for no financial, I guess. They're not going to buy a yacht anytime soon. We'll put it that way. But this is another way in aiding the market and kind of saying thank you from the students when you just pay generally. And I'm thinking for investors, we would just be taking 1% of that. And when you combine that over the world, that adds up. And that's Go Yoga.
Can I borrow that mic?
Yes.
No? Yes? Do you want it or not?
I'm gonna let him use that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll just yell.
Yep.
So first of all, I think it was a great job, especially since this is your first presentation since 8th grade. So I actually like that a lot because you made yourself very human at the start of the presentation, kind of opened yourself up and made you vulnerable. You heard people laugh. I think that's always good. It put people at ease. You're very authentic as a presenter, and I would encourage you to continue doing that. Don't try and change it. It comes across as very natural, not salesy, very passionate. So I think that's all great. The positives I saw in it, very clear to understand what you're doing, clear to understand why it's important there. You can understand why it's going to be beneficial to yoga instructors and the yoga industry in general. The concerns get more towards where you started talking at the end, which is business model. Because if you are going to look at investors, I get the social good of what you're doing. If you are going to look for investors, they're going to want to know how do you monetize it and how do you get that return. So talk a little bit more about that 1% thing you got to at the very end and how you do that.
Right. Thank you.
So tell us more about how you're going to do that.
So the 1% model, when I started this idea, I was just kind of throwing it at everybody just to kind of meet the one person who just said, you know that already exists, right? Like, and I got a lot of really good suggestions and a lot of really good questions, like, how are you going to keep people from just kind of freely joining a yoga class that's out in the open? And I was like, well, I don't know, it's a good problem. I'll get to it when it becomes a problem. Another one was how you know if people are getting to the yoga studio through the app. And I was like, that's another really good question. I will figure out an answer to that. And I wanted to set up a purchasing option through the application so that when you purchase it, and this is specific to the kind of open free space classes. So this would not be towards studios because that kind of leeches off of something that they've built by hand. And a lot of them are small and medium companies, and I don't want to be that guy who monetized yoga. This would only be like a small 1% rate off of what a yoga teacher is setting up for themselves. And those purchases or those places would only be reserved through the website.
Great. Offline, when there's not 300 million people watching, there's a company I want to introduce you to in Charlotte that I think could really help you because they've working on that monetization part. So that could be great for you.
Thank you.
I would also reiterate, good job in the presentation. I like the style. I like the flow. And I like the story up front about being your first pitch since 8th grade, so that was good. I also like the way you engage the audience, right? And I have to say, I'm not a yoga person, shocker. But I was impressed. You got the audience, and over 50% of the audience, at least by my rough count, was at least interested in some way in yoga, and so that was I think a very good technique. I think your information about the numbers, the kind of aggregate market, was good. One comment there: if this was an investor pitch, or at least that's the way I think you described it. You can't go into an investor pitch with data that's from 3 years ago, right? And so you need to figure out more current data, because the investor's going to look at that and say, okay, if that data's 3 years old, then what you're doing is not really on the cutting edge. So you want to find current data, even if it's a newspaper article. You can say something was reported in 2014. You don't want to have data that's that old.
Gotcha.
Also, and this is something that I think every entrepreneur does, you need a really crisp statement up front about what you're doing, right? Because you went in the introduction kind of, I think we were 5 minutes or so almost in before I really had an understanding when you did the geolocation thing.
I see.
Start with that. Say, look, just to, and make it a crisp statement. It's I'm doing for yoga what blank did for some other industry, and then people get the analogy. And then they get the mindset, especially investors. Investors are pretty dumb on the most part, and they probably don't know anything about yoga, right? For the most part. So getting them centered on this is what I'm going to be talking about early, I think, is a really good bit of advice.
Okay.
The other part, when you got into business model, right? So there were a couple things. You should abandon the 1% model immediately, by the way, because it's not enough to get anybody interested.
Gotcha.
So just I understand why you're going there, but make it a referral model or something. And I'll tell you a short story. So one of the companies that we ended up acquiring when I was at that little bank down the street was a company called CarFinance.com. And they were doing a marketplace for people who wanted to buy cars online. You could get your voucher, and they would provide you the loan, basically, right? And it had a fatal flaw. And that fatal flaw was you literally printed out a voucher and walked into the car dealership with your voucher of, here, I can pay for my car with this voucher. And guess what the dealership people did in the F&I office inside the dealership? They said, oh, I can beat that deal. They tore the voucher up and threw it in the trash can. And I'm a little afraid that you've got a similar potential model here. So you got to figure out how your model works from a referral point of view, so that you don't get abandoned right as you push people to the class and you don't get paid. So you got to figure that out.
Gotcha.
And the other part is, there is always competition. If you're talking to investors, you always have to do a little bit of a landscape slide on how do people, and the competition now may be as simple as, how do those companies advertise to draw people into the yoga class now? And again, you have two problems, right? You have a typical marketplace problem, and you've got to drive people that want to do yoga into, and then you've got to get them into a class, so those are the two ends of your market.
Right.
And so you got to figure out what the value proposition is to both sides of that market.
Good point. Nice. That was a referral, and you're go after a
Hey, look,
referral.
if you go to you walk into somebody that's teaching a yoga class, right, and ask them what's their customer acquisition cost? What does it cost them to acquire, right? Are they running an ad in the paper, and that's for everybody that walks in and signs up, it's costing them $5 or $10? Then there's where you want to compete. So figure out what you're competing against for that customer acquisition.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Let's go to the audience.
All right.
Let me borrow that from you real quick.
Not a
Any
problem.
questions from the audience?
First of all, I think it's a great idea. I really like the public space idea too. I think that's something that people are clamoring for these days, is a greater sense of community, especially in an urban setting. I think people who do yoga especially would be inclined to look for something like that. One thing to consider, it might be a complicated factor, is whether you need a license to do business in a public space. Like
Right.
a hot dog vendor has to pay $100 a year or something to whatever city he's in to get the license. I'm not sure how that would work with something that's more service-based, but something to think about as you move forward.
Gotcha.
Comments, thoughts, questions?
Bobby, I think one of the comment on your sort of the pitch construction. You described it as it's for consumers and investors. I think those are two very, very different things.
Competing.
And trying to hit both, I think leaves you a little incomplete on each one.
Yeah. Gotcha.
So I would develop two pitches. One to get everybody excited about using the app,
Okay.
and the second to get people excited about the business aspect of it. But I would bifurcate it. Right?
Gotcha. Nice.
Thank you, Greg. Someone back there?
And then,
Hi. I appreciate your pitch, and I think your app has potential. As a longtime yoga teacher and studio owner, I'd like to speak to you from the standpoint of the yoga teacher as an entrepreneur,
right.
as an independent contractor. From that standpoint, teachers would very much be interested in paying likely a monthly fee, or sign on for a year or for a monthly fee to be able to use your app or to be advertised on your app, as opposed to taking a percentage. Presenting, once you get this app a little more refined, presenting at yoga conferences where teachers can have the option to sign up. You could do a lot of beta site testing by going that route.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Man.
Is it Kelly?
Yes.
Kelly, is this your first time?
Yes, it is.
Excellent.
You can't make this stuff up.
It's like, it's karma.
Thank you very much.
I'm good, you don't need to climb over. I just wanted to just give you a shout out about another company or an organization here in Charlotte by another friend of ours who's unfortunately not here this morning. A guy named Jeff Brokaw and a site called appvested.com.
Okay.
You need to pitch them, but I'd certainly reach out to them and see whether you can talk to them about your idea. So it's appvested.com.
Thank you.
Yeah, interesting concept. Are you far enough along to understand or think about what your capital requirements are?
No.
So actually on that front, so you can't do an investor pitch without having an ask, and you didn't have an ask. So
I see.
how much money do you need to actually get this to fruition?
Yeah.
That needed to be in the investor pitch. And you ought to, at a minimum, that ought to be towards the end, right? When you're saying, okay, here's what I need to make this work.
Here's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Any other questions, any thoughts? I told you it was gonna be good, didn't I?
I was just going to say, Bob, I can talk loud. I was just going to suggest that the first slide that you had, other than updating your numbers to what current year,
Right.
would be a graph to show how the yoga,
Growth.
how it is increasing in
Yeah, yeah.
in the United States, but also worldwide. And perhaps even, like getting hotel data, that's often, classes offered at high-end hotels and things like that. Might do that.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you. Oh,
Got time for one more quick one.
if there's a quick one.
All right.
Thanks for the advice, guys.
Bobby Bird.